This video is sponsored by World of Warships. The state of New Jersey is home to one of America's most famed museum ships, the USS New Jersey. But surprisingly, this wasn't the state's first museum of the kind. That's right, and you probably wouldn't imagine a 312-foot submarine stuck in a local river. The unfortunate fate with many museum ships is that they aren't large enough to attract an audience and end up in a desperate situation such as this. The fate of the USS Ling is dark. This World War II submarine, currently stuck in the Hackensack River, has no way out. But how did her story start, and where will it go from here? That's what we'll be looking into today, so join me as we discover the history of New Jersey's USS Ling. I'm your host Ryan Sokash, and you're watching It's History. The USS Ling is a Balao-class submarine designated by the US Navy as a successor to the active Gato submarines. This was a major step forward as improved steel forging gave the submarines better durability, both against attacks and sea pressure. These improvements also affected the submarine's ergonomics and added a pair of standard radars for surface targeting and detecting incoming aircraft. Before getting into the vessel's story, I wanted to point out that the USS Ling is a Balao-class submarine, and you can play with a Balao-class submarine in World of Warships. World of Warships is a free-to-play game available for PC. It's not just a game, it's a floating digital museum displaying breathtaking recreations of not just the most fearsome vessels of the First and Second World Wars, but also many blueprints and designs of ships that never saw battle. These ships have been given new life in the game's virtual dockyard. Enjoy new content releases every month, whether it's new ships, in-game nations, or even ship classes. The graphics are amazing, with more than 40 unique maps with dynamic weather, all of which have been updated with stunning new water effects and textures. World of Warships offers multiple ship classes to choose from, so you can conquer the oceans your way, using big-hitting battleships, quick and devastating destroyers, and do-it-all cruisers. And perhaps the best part is that you can also connect with other players. Join the passionate fan base with action in-game, participate in discussions on the forums and Discord channel, tune into live streams, or participate in tournaments on PC or other consoles. So if you want the perfect balance of action and strategic gameplay, download World of Warships using the first link in the description. Use promo code WARSHIPS to get exclusive rewards, including a bunch of doubloons, credits, premium account time, and a free ship after you complete 15 battles. Thank you, World of Warships, for supporting the channel, and now, back to the USS Ling. The subs also included 10 torpedo tubes, 6 fore, 4 aft, and 4-inch deck guns, although a lot of submarine crews somehow ended up acquiring stripped-down and modified 5-inch guns instead. As we'll get to, the Ling never did this. 120 Balao-class submarines were built, and USS Ling began construction on November 2nd, 1942, and was finished on the 8th of June, 1945. She arrived too late to take any decisive action in World War II and was taken off the Navy's roster by October of 1946. From there, she remained in the mothballs and unattended and uncared for until 1960, when she was towed to the Brooklyn Naval Yard for repairs and repurposing into a training ship. After 2 years of repair service, she joined the reserve and training fleet and trained naval crews until finally being taken off the register for good in 1971. Like with other ships we've discussed on the channel, it was incredibly likely that the Ling would be scrapped or sunk. Fortunately for the submarine, however, it had a small-town savior. The story all really starts with the gas station owner, Dan Tyler, hearing the news that the submarine would be decommissioned. Having served on the boat in World War II, he became immediately concerned. He knew from the fates of other wartime ships that one of two things would happen. The boat would be sunk in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and never be seen again, or it would be sent to the scrappers and turned into razor blades. He wrote, quote, "I couldn't stand the idea of shaving every morning with a ship I served on." He, along with 30 other submarine veterans, wrote to the Navy and Congress asking them to surrender the ship as a memorial and a museum. In New Jersey, the group of World War and post-war submarine veterans had been advocating for the surplus submarine to be moved to a riverfront berthing as a memorial and museum. Unlike our previous video on the U-505, this was far more practical given both its East Coast estuary location and financial support of Donald Borg, who served as president of the Bergen Evening Record, who published their announcements and provided a strong local capital investment. Just like with Chicago's U-505, the Navy told the veterans that if they could provide a tugboat at their expense by January the 15th, the Navy would hand over the ship at no cost. Head of the local Veterans Association, Jack Bennett, told the Navy in papers, quote, "We'll make the deadline." In the last months of 1971, they created the Submarine Memorial Association. They began rapidly bringing on local businesses and specialists to ready the berth cleared on a plot of land owned by the Evening Record. They met the Navy's deadline, and to jubilation, Ling was towed to Hackensack on January the 13th. When asked why they would go to such effort for the submarine, the commander of the state submarine veterans said, quote, "This is the last submarine of its type. All others have either been sunk or made into razor blades. It would be a shame to lose it." The project was intense, as months of repairs, painting, maintenance, and general preparations were needed. Still, the submarine opened to visitors on July the 7th, 1973, following a massive grassroots campaign to complete preservation efforts. Still, that didn't make things easy from day one. Just in insurance dues, the Preservation Society owed $10,000, another $2,500 for tugboat insurance, and a further $1,800 for the tugboat's actual fare. I just want to point out that these kind of costs are not extraordinary, unexpected, or even unfair. These kind of endeavors in preserving historical vessels are just that expensive. With that set aside, for the next few years, everything went well. The submarine was periodically open for visiting and was cherished by the community. Girls and Boy Scouts visited the troop fields, school classes did as well, and there was even a jazz concert on board in 1978. At the park, the concert was concluded by the Bergen County Jazz Ensemble, a four-man group known by the city to perform at nonprofit and community venues to promote music, local businesses, and other community initiatives. And there were also naysayers offering environmental concerns early on about dredging part of the river to house a 28-year-old submarine. But those concerns were largely disregarded by the state and federal authorities, so basically, they were dismissed. For the rest of the 70s and going into the 80s, nothing seemed to be off at the Submarine Museum. That was until March of 1988, when the new chairman of the record, Malcolm Borg, told Bergen County and the museum that he was planning an expansion to the record's offices and other real estate ventures. As a part of this, the previously unoccupied land on the Hackensack River would be built up, and the submarine would have to move. Even the executive of Bergen County, William McDowell, told his peers and Borg that he was surprised by the decision, as Malcolm's father had been so instrumental in preserving the submarine in the first place. He attempted to call Borg, but his office said he was out of town. How convenient. Chairwoman Janet Schumer of the Board of Commerce told Borg and the county she was disappointed with Borg's decision, but would seek options to relocate the submarine. Two other spots on the river were quickly considered for the project, but were too shallow, and for all their talk, the county authorities were slow to pursue a costly dredging operation. When confronted by this decision, Borg would later say, quote, "I need the property," and quote, "They're not being kicked out." Sentiments rather contrasting all of the obvious appearances. Look, I can appreciate that leasing waterfront property at a fixed rate of $1 a year might not look good to your accountant, but when his father and businesses were so crucial to preserving the submarine in the first place, the decision to evict it can only be viewed in poor taste. Defenders might say that he didn't displace the submarine, as it stayed in place for years after this, but there's a nuance. As we discovered in the video about Chicago's U-505, moving a submarine through narrow, shallow rivers is a difficult mission that takes a lot of preparation. Borg and his company gave Ling and her tenders none. So even when the decision was made official, the submarine stayed in place and stayed open. We looked closely through local reporting and tried to find further information about Borg's decision, but before the breaking of this news in March, there was nothing. There's no public indication that before suddenly evicting the submarine, he attempted to make any kind of a deal with the Museum Foundation. Meanwhile, almost everyone else in the county, including Assemblyman Patrick J. Roma, was doing almost everything in their power to preserve the vessel. Roma had drafted a bill that, when eventually passed by both chambers, designated the Ling as New Jersey's official state naval museum. Certainly in part because of this drama, by 1991, the museum had seen significantly decreased foot traffic and was still searching for an alternative location. They hoped Memorial Park in Mammoth County would be that location, a notion confirmed by the Asbury Park Press in November of 1991. Many believed that the USS Ling would provide a boost to the borough's economy, and so the vessel was welcomed. The county and borough authorities looked at the proposal favorably and applied for a $500,000 low-interest loan to begin restructuring and dredging. By now, museum ships were becoming even more common across the United States, and officials for the museum and county argued that the submarine would flourish if it were moved to a more prominent area. Still, for the next several years, although Borg claimed to have evicted the submarine, he and Ling's preservers had a problem. There was nowhere to go, or at least right away. Plans like the one in Liberty Park in Mammoth surfaced all over the state, such as the plan to move it to Hoboken in 1995. This plan, proposed to the City Council and Port Authority, proposed a $4 million restoration and relocation project for the sub, as a part of a larger $74 million program to revitalize the Hoboken infrastructure, economy, and waterfront district in which the Ling would be moved. All of these efforts, valued as they were for the submarine, failed. Ling wouldn't be moved even after being officially evicted by Borg. Surprisingly, the Submarine Museum remained open as it was and continued trying to operate with the reduced traffic while hunting for a new home. Their efforts didn't go unnoticed, and Bergen County continued to honor the submarine, and its keepers were awarded in 2005 for their honorable maintenance of the old vessel. Furthermore, in 2010, two artifacts that appeared on eBay were recognized by observers and the Bergen County prosecutor and returned to the submarine, having been stolen all the way back in 1980. The attempted seller was left off the hook when he willingly returned the stolen brass control wheel and an aluminum-printed checkoff list. Seemingly, he was uninvolved in their theft. Still, through all these events and the turmoil regarding its birthing, one truly random event, would do in the museum. During Super Hurricane Sandy in 2012, water levels in the Hackensack River rose to dangerous levels. Due to these floods, the gangplank connecting Ling to the shore was washed away and lost. Then, partly due to just the storm but also thanks to nature, the river around Ling was filled in with silt. Eventually, investigations around the submarine and relocating it realized that the silt completely engulfed the submarine. It was stuck. With these two realizations, the museum was closed from 2012 onwards, and only a few years later, there was another disaster. Before I even start with this next part, let me give you a warning. Boarding a closed museum vessel or an abandoned shipwreck is incredibly dangerous. This next incident highlights that fact perfectly well, as in 2018, at least 5 men broke into the closed submarine and broke open locks, hatches, and pumps. What their motive was might as well be irrelevant, as it put them in a possibly fatal situation and caused the Ling to sink shortly after. In addition, they stole a bronze memorial plaque dedicated to the American submariners lost during World War II. Police initially refused to indict the men for intentionally flooding the ship, but were convinced to do so a few months later, in July of 2019. Out of the 5 so-called urban explorers, only 1 has been sentenced to a 1-year intervention program and just 10 hours of community service. They got a light sentence, as they may have faced 10 years behind bars for sinking the sub. The judge told the defendants, quote, "Please take it seriously. I've seen many defendants not take it seriously. I think I can already see why." From there, although the Ling was not submerged, it was swamped, with many textile, electrical, and paper pieces of the museum lost forever. For years, it wasn't clear if the submarine could be saved. That was until the intervention of two Kentucky businessmen, Lewis Palmer and Mark Gatton. The two men and their sons had the monumental goal of not just raising the sub, but finally towing it to a new home in Louisville, Kentucky. Once there, it would take birth on the Ohio River and become a centerpiece of the new Louisville Naval Museum. Progress in recovering the submarine was slow, but the men had a high goal and a lot of ambition. With the help of a reasonably successful GoFundMe campaign, the Kentucky group began their observations of the submarine and eventually began to pump the submarine dry. As one reporter wrote, quote, "Weekend after weekend, using a submersible pump, generators, and an open-air compressor on loan from a concrete company across the river, the team drained tens of thousands of gallons from the Ling." The last update on the GoFundMe page states that they had gotten the submarine floating again at a fraction of the cost they believed it would take, and that all the remaining donations would go to sending it to a dry dock, possibly in New York, for repairs. While this update was ages ago in 2021, I do believe their intentions are genuine. As anyone who followed the saga of the Battleship Texas Museum knows, the difficulty in finding dry docks suitable for these tasks is immense. The difficulty here is serious, as they aren't even sure how the Ling would be moved. I hope this preservation effort succeeds. These men probably do mean to preserve the ship, and want the Ling to stand as a lasting reminder of America's naval history and the sacrifices countless men made for their country. But I see a long road ahead for this ship and the people trying to preserve it. I'm on their side, truly, but it would be unfair for me not to point out just how ambitious their plan is. Even in the event it can be repaired while it's still on the Upper East Coast, it would need to be towed down to Florida in the Gulf of Mexico to reach a suitable river for its trip all the way back up to Louisville. In 2019, Lewis Palmer himself said he believed the entire project could cost $10 million, compared to the failed $4 million project just to move the ship to Hoboken. We tried to reach out to them for comment with no success, so let's just suffice it to say that whether this project succeeds or fails, the USS Ling has a long road ahead of her. Anyways, thank you all for watching, hit that subscribe button, and until next time, this is Ryan Sokash, signing off.